Welcome everyone to what we call the the School's Out podcast. I was going to call it something different, but it's Unschooling. We talk about unschooling. I could be called one of your hosts, Philip Mott. I live here with my family in the Midwest, United States. And our kids are mostly school age, 8, 6, and 4 years old, almost 4 years old. And I like music. You can see guitars in my background, and I like reading a lot of books, which is what we're talking about today. Across from me is Hamilton Carter. Hamilton, you can introduce yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Hamilton. My family and I live in San Francisco. There's 3 kids here. They are 11, 9, and 7. And we've been unschooling bare minimum since the third one was born, and pretty much the whole time. And so yeah, happy to be here.
So Hamilton, we kind of opened the show with just a quick update. What's your family up to? What are you guys kind of enjoying in your unschool life right now?
Oh my God, we got to get reintroduced to society this week. So we were actually over the weekend able to go down to our little coffee shop and get bagels and a couple of mochas and sit out on the back porch, which is open air, and hang out. And then we also finally got to where we could take a train to a ferry to a bus to go camping. And so we went camping, and oh my gosh, it was just so incredible. And I'm sure a lot of people have experienced this, but after being in the house nonstop for 2 months, and we used to camp like all the time, it was really, really nice to get back out. So we're all pretty jazzed, and we're looking forward to doing it next week if things hold up.
So I'll do a quick update. We had a fun event happen this week. So we had a young boy introduce himself to our family at the playground the other day, and he was all about like, hey, can we have a sleepover? Like,
oh, wow.
he was fast. He was a fast moving kid. And and I was like, well, let's meet your family. Let's meet your mom. And so that was really cool because we just have not been real connected in this neighborhood yet. So it's been one of our first real connections in the neighborhood. So that's nice.
Yeah.
And who knows if it goes anywhere, but our oldest actually said at dinner that night, he said, up till this point, it's been really hard for me to make friends, but this kid was pretty easy.
Cool.
So very outgoing and kind of touchy-feely. Like we talked a little bit about that, of like, he was trying to hold their hand a lot and like sort of give them hugs and stuff, which is totally cool. But normally our kids have been real like pull back from that kind of stuff. Yeah. And I don't know, they seemed okay with it. So I try not to be like too hovering in that regard and just let them express what they feel comfortable with.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. So maybe this kid had a more comfortable vibe about it, or
yeah, just maybe more charismatic. And he's tried to actually talk to us before when we've walked by, but the kids are like, no, like we're doing okay over here. Don't come over here.
Right on.
Keep your distance. You seem a little too excited to be around us.
Right on.
So we got to meet his family, and they live a few houses down. We have a lot that we want to discuss. We feel like this conversation could go long, so we're gonna try to like keep it corralled. We've tried to create some kind of structure. So Hamilton and I have both taken time to look at what we've read about child development, education, unschooling specifically, that we feel like they are as close as you can get to must reads for us. We kind of reject the notion that there is anything such as a must read unschooling book. That kind of is, philosophically opposed to the idea of unschooling. But for us, these books have been, I think, formative enough that these would be probably the first ones that we would recommend to someone, especially who comes from a similar background to us. So I think we're going to take turns and go back and forth and introduce the book, and try to spend just a couple minutes on each one, maybe asking each other some questions. So Hamilton, do you want to start this off, or do you want me to
Sure.
take the first one? What do you think?
Yeah, I can kick it off. Yeah, my first book that would like to talk about is Free to Learn by Peter Gray. And it was one, so my partner was homeschooled. And I think I maybe have talked about this before, because I talk about it a lot, but she is the one that introduced unschooling to me, because I was in public schools, but I was a kid that would get done with everything really quick and be like, hey, can I go to the library? And back then, at least, they're like, yeah, please go, bye. And this kind of carried through all the way through to high school. And in high school, I was doing a whole bunch of science fair, and like the last 2 or 3 years of high school, I basically just had a hall pass. And so I would get done in class and then zoom back to the physics lab, get some more stuff done, and then go to the next class. And I told my partner about this when we were dating, and she's like, you unschooled yourself in the public school system. And so I really liked what I had done, and that got me really interested in unschooling. And so pretty much I was already sold. My partner said, this is what it is. Yeah, we can do it if there's enough opportunities for the kids to do it, to explore things, and enough places for them to socialize. And so I was already pretty much sold, but Free to Learn, Peter Gray's son, and Philip, feel free to jump in and correct me, because it's been a few years since I've read it. But his son was unschooled. And I believe his son went through Sudbury schools mostly, if not entirely. And Peter Gray is a psychologist he's a PhD. He's got a column on the Psychology Today website, and he advocates for unschooling, and he actually advocates for free range kids, which is another book I'm going to touch on later, quite a bit. And so his book kind of pointed out to me that unschooling was fine, that it could work. So it very much validated what I already thought, that it could all work. He had done a study on of graduates of the Sudbury Center where his son went to school. And, he's like, here's the results. And they seemed, pretty cross-sectional. Some people were huge successes. Some people were yup, I graduated successes. And so that all seemed normal. And so, yeah, it's not so much my kind of book, because it's big into papers and big into studies and numbers. But it just gave me a feel that all right, this has been looked at and it's okay. And the crazy thing not crazy, but the non-typical thing I already decided to do, turns out other people have done it, and it looks good. So that's one I suggest, and that's why we like it.
Yeah, it's worth mentioning that Peter Gray actually built most of his career around writing psychology textbooks.
Okay.
And he's an instructor. He was a professor of psychology at, I want to say Boston College, but I'm not sure if that's right. But he actually shifted his, I believe he shifted his focus after seeing the experiences of his family through Sudbury Valley, shifted his focus because he really wanted to understand play in across different societies, as he saw their son flourishing in this different school system. So yeah, he's a fantastic one. He's not on my list, and I've read the book. It's partially because by the time I got to Peter Gray, I already believed a lot of this stuff. He was his book highlighted, his book was like, it was like the best parts of all the books that I had read up to that point. So apart from some really powerful illustrations, it wasn't anything new to me at that point. Kind of like what you're
Got it.
saying. It's like I was already bought in. I read the book and it's like, all right, this is a great book.
I guess the only other thing I would add to about free to learn is we found it really handy. Sometimes a couple so we there are 3 kids here, and when the third one was born, we realized that to have a nanny would actually be cheaper than 3 doses of daycare payments every month. And so the kids had a variety of nannies, or a variety of nannies worked with the kids from the time the third kid was born until about 2 years ago. And one thing that Free to Learn was really good with is, one of the best nannies they ever worked with, we came back in the first day and she's like, oh no, kid number 2, you have to do it this way, and we're like, oh wow, we're glad we walked into this, because nope, he doesn't, and here's ways you can cope with it, and definitely, and just to be clear, we were like, definitely, if it's about his safety, he has to do it that way. But other than that, this is what we think. And then we actually suggested both Free to Learn and another book that I'm going to talk about later to the nanny, and they read them and were like, oh yeah, I'm all right, cool, I get it, fine,
Yeah,
that's what we'll do. So
yeah, if you've never read a book about unschooling, it's a great summary about the psychology of self-directed learning. So it's invaluable for that. Absolutely. So my first choice was, and I put mine in chronological order. So when our firstborn was just a year old, I read a book by William Glasser called Choice Theory. And Choice Theory was written in the mid-90s. And this was the book that helped show me that control wrecked relationships. And when I read his book, it's like I understood my school experience for the first time in my life. I mean, it was revelatory to me. It was not the kind of thing that just validated what I already believed. It was what I would consider a paradigm shift. It completely changed the way that I saw the world. And I often say about all of these books that I'm talking about today, that I wouldn't have been open to this book if I hadn't read the book before it. And that's why I think it's important for me to read it in order. Now, as I've read more psychology books over the years, I've found that a lot of these psychology books are saying the same thing that Glasser was saying, just in different words. So I think there's a lot of different ways to get there. But for me, it impacted the way that I thought about my classroom, because I was a classroom teacher at the time. It changed the way I thought about my relationship with my spouse and how I communicated with her. And for him, everything came back to our attempts to control others, and sort of our refusal to control ourselves and learn to control ourselves.
Okay, cool. How did it influence your parenting?
Mostly because it talks about the importance of understanding that their happiness is their responsibility.
Okay.
And so I can't make them happy. They can't make me unhappy. Happiness comes from within.
Okay.
Anger comes from within. So someone might do something that awakens anger within you, but that anger still comes from here. They can't make me angry. Depression, he says, it's a reasonable reaction to the situation that we're in. Actually, depression makes perfect sense. But that doesn't mean that it's completely out of our control, that we have some control of it. Now, how much each individual person has is up for debate. We don't really know. And you can't tell. Now, some people have taken that kind of message too far and said, well, it's all in your mind. You have complete control of your mental health. That's not true either. You know, we
Yeah.
have, I think we have more control than we think we do, but we can't just say, all right, I'm going to be better today,
Yeah.
you know,
No, exactly.
because that's sort of where that toxic positivity comes from. It's like, oh, you just need to have a good attitude. It's like, well, not really, because I'm depressed. You know,
Right.
I just lost someone that's close to me, or I'm going through something that's difficult. It makes sense for my body to be going through this.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, wow. No, that's cool because the thing about kids make themselves happy or well, yeah, it's nice to see a book that doesn't say, I think, that with what little I know about it, having not read it, that doesn't say that parents are responsible for every feeling or emotion that flits across their child's mind over the
Yeah.
course of a day. I mean, because God, I mean, I like to help, and I wish I could make everything perfect all the time. And
Mhm.
sometimes it's a big leap to realize that no, this actually had zero to do with me. Yeah,
Mhm.
and I'm here to help. But yeah, that's nice to have somebody actually say that.
Yeah. What's next on your list?
Next on my list is another statistics book, and the two authors are actually work together. It's Free Range Kids by Lenore Skenazy. And so she has worked, and I didn't know about Peter Gray doing research on play. And yeah, she has worked hand in hand with Peter Gray, trying to get kids where they can go out and play on their own. And kind of how she got in the field was she was a news reporter in New York City. I don't know how long ago, somewhere between 10 and 20 years ago, and put her 9-year-old kid on the subway and said, take the subway home. And the kid was prepared, and the kid wanted to do it, and the kid knew how to do it, and everything was fine. And everything did wind up fine. But she reported it either in her column or on a news story, and then everything just went haywire because I guess a whole bunch of people, all of a sudden said she was a horrible parent and
Yeah.
how could she have done this thing. And that kind of led her to write Free Range Kids, and now she's in charge of an organization called, I believe right now it's called letgrow.org, where they
Mhm.
go around to schools and they promote independent projects for kids, to help kids and parents get used to kids out doing things on their own. So and that's essentially what it is it's a book that talks about how kids can do more than maybe a lot of people think they can, and how they can function independently, and how to let them do that, um and also has it, and again for me, so kind of the direction I was coming from, is when I was a kid, I was allowed to wander around town quite a bit. But I still found myself being, as a kid, being shy and a little bit withdrawn. And oh my gosh, I don't know about this situation. What's going on? And I wanted the kids here to feel comfortable, basically just walk in anywhere they or I could think of and feel comfortable being there. And so a good way to do that to me seemed to let them be as independent as they could in as many places as they could be, as soon as they could handle it. And this is a thing we might want to talk about on some other podcast, but it's always kind of intrigued me that as unschooling parents, we say, okay, well, we let the kids do, follow their interests, and we do. But I've always kind of had this kind of meta thought that well, yeah, I do, but also there were things that I had hoped to accomplish for them, like being more familiar with the world.
Mhm.
That they didn't choose that. I was like, I'm going to try these things and we'll see if it works. And does that make me less of an unschooler? I don't know.
Mm,
And then it's like there's this whole question too, right? If I didn't do anything, how would they even know what they had to choose from? Because when you're a toddler, especially, you can't really get outside the house. Not easily. Well, you can't reach the doorknob for starters. Um,
yeah.
and so anyway, that's kind of an abstract thought off on this. But yeah, again, there was a thing I wanted to do. There was a way I thought it could work. And I grew up with my dad's stories all the time of him and his brothers being out around town, just like nonstop, back in the 40s and 50s.
Yeah.
And so that seemed good. And there was what I hoped to set up for the kids to exist in. And again, free range kids just kind of like throws out statistics. It says, A, it's not a bad thing. And B, here's the statistics. And so like the one that stuck out to me the most was that kids are less likely to be abducted by a stranger than they are to be struck by lightning. Statistically speaking, doesn't mean
Yeah.
either one of them don't ever happen, and if somebody's worried about it, it doesn't mean that's not a perfectly valid worry. But that's where the statistics are. And
Yeah.
so that again just validated kind of like, ooh, I already wanted to do this. This book says statistically speaking, looks good. And so it was really good that way. And again, it was also really good. We did a thing with all the nannies that the kids worked with, that I would go along with them and the kids the first 2 days. And with me, the kids, even when they were, gosh, let's say 8, 6, and 4, but I think it was younger than that. It was more like the kids were allowed to be like a block ahead, and they knew they had to stop at the next corner. And so I would go right along with the kids and the nanny and be like, okay, so here's what they can do, and here's how you can. And they would listen for me, and I'd holler a block ahead, and they'd come back or change direction or whatever, and we'd be like, this is what you can do. Again, with safety, and I'm using the nannies as an example of, if you're a parent that doesn't do this kind of thing and doesn't want to do this kind of thing, yeah, totally don't. And even so with the nannies, I'd be like, hey, look, so your number one job is keep them safe. We want them to be doing things like this. If you don't feel today, because probably you don't, if you don't feel today that you can let them run to the end of the block, don't keep them
Yeah.
to, and again, it was also this respectful parenting thing. It was like, talk to them, tell them, hey, where I feel with you safe being today is 8 feet in front of me.
Yeah.
And just tell them, and they'll be like, we've talked to them and told them, that this is how things are going to go, and you guys will ease into it. And but so we do that, and also a couple of the nannies also read free range kids, and they're like, okay,
Yeah.
all right, see where you're headed, and yeah, let's see where we can get. And so it was a really good book in the regard of what you can do. So.
And Skenazy is really trying to push us, to the reader, to think about constantly reevaluating that trust and pushing yourself of like, okay, maybe you're at 8 feet now, but what would 10 foot look like? Think about what do your kids have to show you to be at 10 foot, and then 50 foot, and then 100 foot, where it's not a sort of leave it and forget it, set the boundary and never reevaluate it. That's, free range kind of comes from an agricultural trend, which was to take the livestock out of the cages and put them out in the field, but the field still had a fence.
Okay, yeah.
You didn't enclose the wolf den in the fence.
Right.
You kept the wolves out still, but you gave the animals everything that they needed, and trusted that they would eat when they were hungry, and they would kind of follow the rules of their DNA. But we need to constantly rebuild those fences and give kids the tools to live a real life. And for you guys, that means transit. But for us, it's more about, how do you walk on a country road without getting hit?
Right.
Because
yeah.
we don't have public transit, and out in the rural areas, the roads are narrow. There's no sidewalks. There's very little shoulder. So out here, you have to be a lot more aware of cars around you than you would have to be in an area with sidewalks. And I grew up in that area, so I can help them. Yeah, definitely highly recommended. And I know Skenazy's content a little bit, and my wife has read that book, but I have not read that one yet.
Cool.
So next on my list was, and I bought, I think, 15 books in 2014. I went back and looked at my receipts.
Oh, wow.
This I did a few years ago, but after I read Choice Theory, I went on a buying spree and I bought all kinds of like progressive education books because I was a kind of a staunch conservative up to that point. So Alfie Kohn, which was also published in the mid 90s, he published Punished by Rewards. And what this really helped me understand, the tagline for that one was, I have it right here, the trouble with gold stars, incentive plans, A's and praise, A's, praise, and other bribes. And, in the classroom, I was using these positive reinforcements. I was using what was called good job tickets, where, this concept of catching kids being good and giving them recognition for that.
Oh.
And which was very much like behaviorism. And Kohn really helped expose what that can create in terms of a classroom culture. And he provides a lot of research and a lot of studies that help illustrate that. And that was the first that I became aware of. So I had already gone away from like negative punishments. And now I was like, oh, okay, we're going to do the positive side. So he really shows the reader that punishment and bribes or punishment and praise are not opposites. They're two sides of the same coin. And it kind of builds on Glasser because it's all about control and coercion, manipulating someone with either negative or positive reinforcement. So that was another book that was really formative for me. I'd like to point out that both of these books, the first two books that I've mentioned, came out while I was in high school. And when I read them and I looked at the publishing dates, I felt resentment towards the adults in my life for not having read that and then changed the way that they did things.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah.
Because I graduated in 99. And so I was like, oh, this book was out before I graduated, and so there should have been someone in my building who has read this and, connected with me in a different way. And that's, now that I understand how education works a little bit more, I understand why that wasn't the case. But I still felt a lot of resentment about that when I read those pieces.
So if punishment and reward are like opposite sides of the same coin, what does Kohn suggest? Does he suggest anything instead?
Oh, that's a good point. It's really a lot more about collaboration, where Alfie Kohn is more like, we need to collaborate and find the best future for you, and you're going to have a voice in that. So that would be what I would say is the different thing.
So you get a choice, but you get to choose from these things I set up.
Yeah, it's more like a toddler choice of like, do you want the red sweater or the green sweater?
Or the used car salesman choice.
Yeah,
Same
exactly. Idea. Yeah. So if I'm talking about Punished by Rewards, it's like the research background of why I really walked away from punishments. And it helped me see rewards in the same way that I was starting to see punishments.
Cool.
What's your next one?
You know what? Let me go outside the totally just validating books. And my next one is Writing Without Teachers by Peter Elbow. And to me, this was actually something I ran into his other book, which is called Writing with Power, when I was a grad student. Had we had kids yet? No, we hadn't. The first kid was on the way. But it's still, it doesn't claim to be an unschooling book. I don't even know if Peter Elbow knows what unschooling is. But it was very much that to write, to learn to write, what you need to do is write. And which sounds ridiculous, but on the face of it, but a lot of people, and he talks about this, we're like, well, to learn to write properly, you will need to read a lot first and read theory and let me teach you grammar and on and on and on. And he's like, yeah, that's all lovely. You went to a traditional school system, great, whatever. But now you're out and you're in grad school or you're in the real world. And for goodness sakes, just write things on the page was the first thing. And the second thing was seek out people. Well, I mean, he was writing for people that wanted to either publish to an academic audience or a popular audience. He was writing for people that wanted to be authors in some way. And so we had this underlying premise that you want to share this with people. And based on that premise, he's like, okay, first thing is just write. And the second thing was seek out people to give you feedback on your writing. And then he very carefully says, here's how you have feedback on writing without it turning into a complete and utter mess, which is before the person reads what they've written, they tell the people listening, hey, and that was the other thing, it gets read out loud. But they tell the people, okay, I'm going to read this thing. This is what it's about. This is what I'd like feedback on. And it could be, I'd like feedback on grammar, or it might be, I'm trying to come across with this tone. What tone do you think it comes across with? Or according to Elbow, even better would be, don't bait them like that or lead them like that. Just tell them, what tone do you think this has after I've read it? And also they would have another person in the room read it than the author. So that way you kind of divorce the author from the work. And so yeah, he was very much that you can write already, which is kind of a very unschooling look at things. And so that is how me and one of the kids here, that's how I've done my writing. I was already doing it that way, but once I found out about this in the class, I was like, woohoo. And one
It
of the
like
kids
solidified it for you, like
yeah,
it sort of gave you a structure to talk about it in that way.
exactly. Yeah, I had always written like in my own voice. I like when people would be like, it's difficult to write. I'm like, well, don't you just think about what you think? Which I learned, which I didn't know this. I guess some people don't think in words in their head, which would be a perfectly valid reason not to do this. So I was ignorant when I used to think this, but I was like, well, gosh, I just think about what I would say and then I write that down on the paper. How hard is it to write? And so if you are a person that thinks in words, yeah. And this, yeah, again, it kind of validated, yeah, just run with it. And that's how one of the kids here and I have set up writing groups for the homeschooling groups here, and actually for a library in town as well. And so yeah, that's my other one. I definitely would not say it's a must read for unschoolers, but it is interesting in the unschooling kind of way. It's just like, what, if you want to do the thing, go do the thing, and sure, find people that are experts and that can teach you, but do the thing. So
a book like that, I think, takes one specific example like writing and say, look, here's how we learn how to write. And as when an unschooler reads that, they say, oh wait, I could do this in computer programming too. I could do this with guitar. I could do this. Oh, I could teach my kids this way. But it reminds me of a class, of one of our first teacher preparation classes, which the instructor asked, how do you learn to play golf? And we were kind of like, oh, well, you would maybe take lessons, you would go to the driving range, you would hit a lot of golf balls. And she was like, yeah, you play a lot of golf, in other words. You play golf in a lot of different ways. Like you might read some articles, you might read some books, but you don't learn to play golf by only doing those things. And that's what we want to teach you in this course, is that learning is about doing a lot of times. And the kids have to be able to have chances to do the things you want them to learn.
Yep.
Now, unschooling takes that a step further and says, yes, that mechanism works. We have to do to be able to learn, but now we take out what we want to teach them out of the equation. We use the same mechanism as you learn by doing, but you get to decide what you want to learn.
Yeah.
And it has a lot of power. So that sounds like a really cool choice. I was interested to hear that based on the title. So my next one is I read in 2014, the year of the many books, I'll call it, Janet Lansbury's No Bad Kids. So we had an 18-month-old, and her kind of focus is pre-K, like birth to pre-K is kind of her expertise. She learned a lot of what she espouses now through the organization called RIE, which is Resources for Infant Educators, which was founded by Magda Gerber. What No Bad Kids, as the title suggests, helped me see those typical toddler behaviors in a new light, and helped me kind of erase a lot of the meaning from those, and help me see that toddler testing and tantrums are really about, them learning that they have a will, and it's as close as you can, say to their job. Like, it's their job to test the authorities in their life. It's this process of them saying, I have my own ideas, and whatever your idea is, mine's the opposite. It's asserting that difference. Now, if you can go back, rewind the tapes a little bit and go back to those years, you can kind of be like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense.
Because I totally had that feeling that like almost every 2 years, like clockwork, they'd be like, okay, I can do these new things that you can do. I might be in charge now. Let me try.
Right. You talked about that before. Yeah. I think I might be in charge now. I think I may run this show.
Cool.
What's next on your list? Unless you have any other questions about No Bad Kids.
No, one thing you told me about No Bad Kids, which I had no idea, which is our only connection to this book, is that Janet married Angela Lansbury's kid.
That's right. Yeah.
And yeah, no, the kids here have seen like every episode of Murder, She Wrote.
Yeah.
It was like one of the calm TV shows that they liked. And yeah, thanks to that, they know that people have extramarital affairs and that they often result in murder. I
don't remember that show very well. I do remember Angela Lansbury's role in it, but I mostly associate her with Mrs. Potts on Beauty and the Beast.
Oh yeah. Oh, that's right. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, she does the part. She does that part.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool.
All right, let's see. What's next on your list?
Child in the City, and I'll do a little plug. I keep forgetting, and hopefully it'll wind up being okay since I keep forgetting. But I have a presentation this Saturday on kids influencing their community, and how, if they're normalized in the space and accepted in the space, they can actually accomplish that. And then it's going to boil down into a how-to of, how we in a big city got the kids out and helped normalize the space for them. Which is going to quote Child in the City. And Child in the City is a book that was written by Colin Ward in the 70s. And Colin Ward was working for the British education system, but he's famous for being an anarchist. And it's really funny because I love the book and I don't know hardly anything about anarchy or what aspects of this book might have reflected Colin Ward's anarchist feelings. But yeah, there it is. Colin Ward is from what I've seen on the internet, more famous for being an anarchist than anything else.
Okay.
And also he wrote books based on things that the British school system asked him to do at the time. And one of the books that came out of that was Child in the City. And what he points out early on is that, speaking of 4-year-olds, he quotes a person who wrote up a story about what they did when they were 4. And he doesn't tell you how old the kid was. I already gave it away. But the kid is like the parents are like, go buy some fish. And this means that the kid has to go across town, hop on a train, or you buy a ticket for the train, hop on the train, go across a bridge, get to the other side of town that's across this river, go explore a naval base, go to a museum, wander over to the fishing part of that side of town, haggle for the fish, and then get the fish home. And at the end of this, you find out the kid's 4. And this was probably in the early 1900s, 1910s, 1920s. But the point of it was, Colin Ward is like, well, kids can do a ton more than we think, always could, do a ton more than we think they can now. But they have to be allowed in the space. And so a lot of the book talks about how even in the 1970s, things are already kind of headed down as far as, do people feel quote unquote safe letting kids out, and are kids accepted when they're out. And he talks about that if you want a citizenry to be able to influence their government, they need to actually learn to be involved with their government. And if they're in the town, they can, and they see how the town works and what's going on, they have a way higher chance of doing that than if they're sequestered in a classroom and then just taught that, hey, there's a city government out there. No, you can, okay, we'll watch it on TV today, but no, you can't go. And it will do things for you once you're big. And okay, done, unit over, we're out. And so he mentions that, yeah, if you're out in the town, you can actually do these things. And he also mentions that your city government or larger levels of government might not actually want you to do this. They might actually think that it's a feature that you're sequestered in that room, because then you come out and you don't have the built-in experience, and who knows how long it will take you or if you'll ever advocate for anything. So yeah, it's really good in that regard.
That's cool. That sounds really intriguing.
Yeah, it points out some of the downsides of kids being independent back in the 70s. So there were kids running away, and it was interesting in large part. And I used to live in Boulder, and you would see this in Boulder, and I think you see this in San Francisco too. That kids were running away because they weren't accepted. So kids were running away to London in his book and being exploited because they weren't accepted by their families. We would see the same thing in Boulder, and it was shitty that the kids had to do this, but it was nice to see that the kids were actually in Boulder in front of the town courthouse. All of a sudden, every morning at 7 a.m, if you were out, you would see like these 25, 30 kids like gather in front of the courthouse. And they were all kids that were homeless in Boulder that were like counting heads and making sure, everybody was okay. We see similar things here in San Francisco. And again, shitty that it happens, heartening that they are actually taking care. I think the rest of us should be taking care of them, but it's really great they learned the skills to take care of themselves, or at least to try to. And so he talks a little bit about that. It's in the language of the 70s, so some of it isn't very nuanced. A
little abrupt at times.
yeah, you can tell he kind of I can't remember the exact example, but I feel like he gets cause and effect confused in some cases. What I took away from it more was what kids can do, and how they can get involved in, and we've seen it here in San Francisco with the kids getting involved with things. And it's because they're around to see it, or they use the resources. We've got there's a kid here that calls in to, actually we've kind of fallen down because actually one of the things we wanted, which was to get our bus routes restored, happened, but was calling into the transit board every month. Hey, we need this bus route back. Here's why. It's because kids use it to get to this place to do this thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so, and if the kid hadn't been out using the bus route, wouldn't have known, wouldn't have cared. So, and that's, I'll be talking about that this weekend. But like some of the things that we do is the kids have been to it touches on a couple of different things. It touches on, it takes a village, but in a really different way than I think most people take that phrase. Yeah, and it touches on just facilitating the living bejesus out of things. The short version of it is the kids have been to as many neighborhoods in town that we could get them to. And every time they have gone out and done something independent, we have started, a block ahead, 2 blocks ahead, bus ahead, train ahead, you're free, go. But when they're a block ahead, I'm actually back there behind them and I'm watching the adults. And if I know this is a place that they're going to be running back and forth on their own, so if it's just a place where cat passing through and I don't really care, I'm just like, hey, I'm with them, but like every once in a while, are those your kids? And I'm like, yeah, they are. And also they're going to be through here a lot, all the time. So yeah, that's totally them. They're totally supposed to be here. And so I'm kind of like building this space for them, where they know people. My wife and I can't go on a date downtown without talking and we love it. Yeah, I don't mean it in a bad way. But we'll walk along the storefronts downtown and the guards don't really know who we are, but they know exactly who the kids are. And they'll be like, and this is where I say it takes a village. It doesn't take a village, not that they're raising the kids, but when the kids run through there, they're like, oh yeah, those kids, they're supposed to be here. A, I'm not going to call the cops. B, since the kids know them and they know the kids, if there was ever a problem, and I don't, at least not at this age, I don't think there's going to be, the kids have a place to veer off to.
Yeah.
And so it builds that, and yeah, we can't go down, without somebody asking us where the kids are. The fact that we're there, nobody could really care less.
That's cool. Yeah.
So yeah.
That's cool. Well, I definitely added that one to my list. That sounds really intriguing. All right, we have 3 books left, and I think we're going to power through it.
Okay.
So I'm going to say, so 4th, I read this just a year and a half ago. Keela S. Richards, Raising Free People. It's not as big of a paradigm shift, I think, for me. More validation, but what she did help me kind of take the next step in my journey was giving me a voice, giving me a way to question my own intentions. And what I love about listening to her podcast and reading her anything that she writes is she is constantly challenging herself and constantly like asking herself, is this the parent I want to be? And so I think her work just sticks out ahead above the others in terms of challenging ourselves. As most of what she is writing about is anecdotal, that it wouldn't be admissible in terms of a research evidence or anything like that.
Yeah.
But it's so powerful in the sense that she has a way with words, and there's just something that I really appreciate about her voice, her sense of humor, her sense of confidence that she talks with, but also there's this like underlying humility underneath all of it, where she believes fully in what she's saying, but she's still like, she's not demanding it of others, she's demanding it of herself, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, I read this one also, I think probably about the same time. And yeah,
it was right after she released it.
Yep.
Okay, so your last book for today.
Oh yeah, my last book is Homegrown by Ben Hewitt. And it is, so its author is actually just a really calming writer. He has a newsletter that he sends out about what's happening around the small town and the farm that he owns. And it's just, oh my God, I read it and it's just like, oh, okay, everything's going to be okay. And so he's very calming. And he has two sons, and they unschool. And they live on a farm in Vermont. And so the sons are, all over the forest all the time and all over the farm all the time. And it was funny that in kind of true unschooling sense, the two kids had an interest, which was hunting, that neither Ben nor his wife shared. And they're just like, oh shit. But
How do we deal with
and
this?
they're like, okay, yeah, no, do it. And I can't remember well, definitely there were fish, but I think there were also squirrels. And they were like, okay, well, if you're gonna hunt, you have to eat it, and that's why you hunt. And the kids were like, well, duh, yeah. And so they ate a lot of squirrel. And it was just, again, just really affirming that unschooling does work. Ben talks a lot about growing up in traditional school and how that made him feel, and then how like unschooling for the kids that he has makes him feel. Kind of contrasts those two things. And it talks about how he, as an unschooling parent, finds resources. And so the kids were into hunting and they were into woodcraft. And I think Ben and his spouse had a little bit of this under their belts, but what, all of a sudden, out of the blue, they came across somebody in town that had tons of this, and also needed a place to live. And so they're like, okay, here's the deal. We have an outbuilding, you can live there, and here are the kids. They needed resource and a way to learn, and ta-da. And they got that set up. And so yeah, it's just, to me, just a really nice cross section of everything's going to be okay, and kids are capable of doing things, and here's how a set of unschooling parents, and they also home birthed, how a set of unschooling independent parents handled those things. So it's totally anecdotal. It's specific only to them. But it was really nice for me to read.
It seems to me that the message of that book, which I have not read, is that in juxtaposition to school, which is let's create a perfect environment where everyone gets everything that they would need, which doesn't actually happen, but that's kind of the idea of school, is it's going to be a perfect learning environment where every child can get access to every piece of education that they might need in that 12-year period. And what Homegrown and Ben Hewitt and his family have done is, let's see what we think our kids need, and let's have a good enough environment that they can get all that they need right now. And the environment will be structured in a way that it can shift and fluid enough that it can move and adapt with us, where the school is more like rubber stamped, like this is how it is, and we can't go outside of those boundaries. We think we've thought of everything, but they haven't. And so, but then when someone comes outside of the boundaries of it, then school doesn't know how to adjust to fit that person in. Where the way you're describing Homegrown is, oh, they wanted to try hunting, so we have to shift our thinking a little bit to encourage that skill, because not everyone needs to learn how to hunt. But if you want to hunt, you probably should need to know how to do it. Like if you're gonna try to eat fish, you should know how you can do that safely, because you can die.
God. Yeah, and I learned a totally new thing, which I didn't know when I grew up fishing. They would go down by the river, they would start a fire, they'd put big rocks around the fire, and then they'd start to fish. After a while, they'd catch a fish, they'd gut it, they'd put it on the rock, and by now the rock is hot, right? And the fish would cook. And so these two kids are just sitting there cooking, eating fish, and yeah.
That's nuts. I have to have so much different like seasoning on fish for me to want to eat it at all.
Okay. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, totally, totally.
Last book. Last book. Around the same time I read Raising Free People, I read Judith Rich Harris's The Nurture Assumption.
All right.
And I did a thread on this when I reread it last year. But I listened to the abridged audiobook first, which was a good experience. And then I bought the book and read the full thing. And my biggest takeaway from this book was her showing to her reader that we do not solely create the people that our kids turn out to be. And a big part of what we pass down to our kids comes through our genes, but the biggest part of how they turn out to be comes from the people that they identify with, and which is most often their peer group. So what the conclusion that I've come to from reading her work is that I cannot promise to anyone, and I think I was promising this, that unschooling creates a certain kind of person.
Okay, yeah.
I, because of my genes, create a certain kind of person, but that's just the starting point. Who my kids end up identifying with, whether it's girl, boy, athlete, nerd, non-binary, anarchist, conservative, like who they end up identifying this with actually shapes their personality far more than any lesson that I would try to teach them. Now, my genes have a big impact on them, their dispositions and things like that. Same with their mom's genes. But the lessons that I try to teach them don't stick as well as the lessons they learn from their peers and the people they identify with. There's a caveat to that is not explored in the book, and you've helped push me kind of in this direction by asking some really pointed questions, which I appreciate, which is challenging the idea that kids can't identify with their parents.
Okay, sure.
Because she never really challenges that. She kind of accepts it on faith that the typical story is kids don't identify with their parents, but you've kind of pushed me to challenge that and say, well, if our kids really love and respect and adore us, and they feel loved and respected and adored by us, then they are more likely to identify with us and therefore more likely to take the lessons that we give them. And I think that is true, but she doesn't really address that in the book. She really only talks about how much influence does a parent have in a setting where the kid goes to school.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's what I was thinking. It was in traditional school. Yep, that sounds exactly right. I mean,
yeah,
that's what you're around 8 hours a day bare minimum, and of course. But outside of traditional school, maybe not even just parents, just other people around town. You got the whole town open to you from what your influences are going to get drawn from, and even so, and I think I don't know if this is where you're headed, but I still think it's really valuable for parents to realize each of us might very well not be the primary influence, no matter what. But yeah, and that's fine. It would be fairly boring.
I totally agree
if we were. I think.
And I think it was a big read for me because I was still acting as if I knew like that I was kind of creating a certain kind of person. And so Judith Harris just really helped me challenge that assumption and has helped me think a lot more humbly about my role in their development, which has been good.
Cool. Are you a lot like your parents, do you think? Or?
I have similar traits.
Yeah.
But I mean, just like a lot of us, I rebelled. I didn't want to do the things that they told me to do.
Right on. Yeah. Same
Yeah,
here.
there are ways that I wish I was more like them. But I met, as I look back and I look at my friends, and I can line up my personality traits more with my friends and my peers than I can to my parents.
Cool.
So we made it through all 10 books.
Right on.
So that is our show for today. Like I said, I have all of our stuff down in the description. Any closing thought that you want to kind of leave anyone with?
Gosh, no, there's been so many thoughts today. I'm all thought it out.
Yeah,
They're all really good.
we're cooked. Thanks for the conversation. Thanks everybody for watching. We hope if you have
Thanks.
thoughts, share what are your most must reads, and then what reads from this list are you kind of thinking, oh, that's definitely one that kind of meets me where I'm at. So
Yeah, or if you've read them and have thoughts on them, that'd be really interesting too.
yeah, awesome. Yeah, we love to read that stuff. All right, bye everybody.
Bye.